Yeah, thank you, Ravi. Okay, so let me get my presentation up. Mm, Can I share my screen? Oh, there we go. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Okay, let me know if y'all can't see this. Can y'all see it now?
No.
No. Okay. Sorry. Let me fix this. Mm, Oh, there we go. I didn't click start. Okay, how about now? Yes. Okay. So today I'll be talking about how to chop cards. It's something I've really enjoyed in debate. I've learned a lot about it over the past 4 years. So yeah. So the roadmap for today, first, I'll do a brief intro on kind of like why we research, what is research. And then I'll go into kind of like the first phase of cutting cards, which is really just kind of like surveying the literature, finding that article you want to start cutting. The second phase is then formatting that card, and the final phase is producing files. So this is kind of like all three steps of debate evidence production. So the first thing I want to talk about is what does chopping cards even mean? So cards are basically quotes read in a debate from a news article, from a journal article, from something like that. They're accompanied by a citation and tag. So the tag is basically a summary of that snippet, and the citation tells you where that snippet is from. And then cutting articles refers to kind of like choosing like a selecting a portion of an article and like cutting it out and like pasting it onto like a card, which is kind of how they did it before we did computer debate. Back in paper debate, they would like copy it and then cut out a part of an article and then paste it on a card, which is why we call them cards. So here's kind of an example of what a card looks like. I'm sure y'all have seen these before. So you have your tag up here, then you've got your like citation, and then the text. So that's kind of like the three parts of the card. So today I'll be talking about kind of like how you get to this point and how you produce these cards. So first thing I want to talk about is why do we cut cards in the first place? Why do we even research? Why can't we just go on the wiki and take cards from other people? Well, I think there's a lot of very valuable there's a lot of benefits to cutting cards as you kind of learn debate. So let's just go through a few of them. The first and foremost is obviously competitive incentives. The reason we cut cards is because we want to beat our opponents. We want to out research them. A lot of times debates can be won on who has the better evidence, who has found the better card on this particular issue. So cutting better cards and learning how to cut cards is important for becoming a more competitive debater. The second reason is just becoming more informed in the round. So a lot of times in rounds I've been in, I've been able to leverage things I've learned while cutting cards and like cross-ex moments and final rebuttals. One rule I had this year and part of my junior year was that every 1AC we read, because I was a 2A, every 1AC we read, I had to have cut or recut every card in the 1AC. So I knew all the warrants, which is really helpful, especially like in 2ARs and 2ACs on case debate, because you know like all the warrants in your evidence. The other reason for cutting cards is just substantiating claims. So if you need to make a certain claim in a round that you don't think can just be made analytically, then cards are useful for that. And the final reason is that if you research correctly, I actually think it's pretty fun to kind of like find those cards. It's like playing a game of Where's Waldo. You're trying to find like this certain article in this like huge pile of research articles, and it's pretty fun to find that one and then deploy it in a round. So next, I kind of want to talk about general tips for how to improve at research. Um, the first one is just work equals habit. So what I mean by this is that research is kind of like a habit. You have to get in the zone when you want to like do a lot of research and you want to be successful in your research. Getting in that zone is pretty difficult, like, but it's invaluable, and you can produce a lot. The second thing I want to say is that good research is efficient. So like as you improve your research, you should always be trying to work on making yourself more efficient. So whether that's like formatting a card, you want to be more efficient, whether that's scrolling through the internet for hours trying to find this article, you want to make that more efficient. So just like when you're trying to focus on improving your own research, always think about efficiency because that's kind of like key. The other thing is patience. Um, Getting better at research will take a lot of time and will take a lot of research. But you should be patient with yourself. It is a process. It took me 4 years to get good at research to be where I am today. But you really just need to be patient with yourself. The other thing is, I think something people don't always do when they're researching, but you need to actually like read the articles you're researching. So that doesn't mean like skimming through it, but it means more of like you need to internalize the things you're researching, the things you're reading, which can be really helpful for research. And the final thing is ask for help. I learned everything I know about research from older debaters, from coaches, from other people in the debate community. So always ask for help. You can email me at any time if you have like a research question on like how do I do this? How do I make this more efficient? If you have like a coach, you should ask them. If you have an older debater on your team, you should ask them. If not, you can email other people in the debate community. Again, you can email me. I love talking about research. So then next, I want to break down like the three phases of research, as I mentioned before. So the first phase is the research portion, which is arguably the most time intensive, the most difficult. People think it's usually like the least fun, which I think it can be pretty fun, but I understand that. Um, the next phase is card formatting, which is kind of like the make or break moment. If you have such a good article, but you format it incorrectly so that you don't get the warrants out in the article, then it's pretty useless. Um, I would say it's the most fun phase. The file production is the third and final phase. It's kind of like the finishing touch. I would say it's undervalued because even if you have great cards, if they're not correctly organized, not accessible to like other debaters on your team, then they're pretty useless. Like if you just have a bunch of cards that are formatted beautifully, that are like amazing researched articles, and they're just sitting like in your work in progress and they're not in the files, then they're kind of useless. So we're gonna go through all three of these, and I'm gonna give some tips and tricks for how to get better at each of these. Okay, so the first phase is the research phase. I will spend most of my time here because I think it's the most difficult for people starting debate. So how do you research? Well, there's two types of research I want to go over today. There is active research and passive research. So the difference between these two is active research involves you like Googling like patents and like pharma companies or something like that. Passive research is just kind of like what certain programs can do for you. So I'll start with passive research. The big one I use is Google Alerts. So Google Alerts, you can kind of like put in search terms, and Google will send you a like compiled list of all the articles from that time period. So let me show you an example. So 2 years ago on the NATO topic, I had three Google Alerts on my Google account. The first one was Defense Security Cooperation Agency, or DISCA. The second one was NATO. The third one was Security Cooperation and NATO. So these three Google Alerts tried to, or like were intended to update me about news in different areas of the topic. So every day, I would get an update if there were any articles using that phrase, and it would send me kind of like a list that looks like this. So this is passive research. So you can find articles based on like Google Alerts. So like this past year, I had articles like that were sent to me every day about whether or not the US was going into a recession soon, right? Because like we had the economy just said. So I wanted to be informed on that. So I kind of had this like compiled list of articles, and I never really had to do research on like recession now because I always had this in my inbox. The second kind of passive research, or the second tool I would recommend for passive research, are RSS feeds, which are really simple syndication feeds. These are a little more complex, and I would just stick to Google Alerts at first. But these are my suggestions for RSS feeds. I've used Feedly and InnoReader, but I've heard the other four are pretty good. And you can just Google those. I'm sure you can find them. But yeah, so I would stick to Google Alerts first. And if you want to get better at passive research, which is just like systems producing articles for you, then you can use Feedly or InnoReader or any of the other four. Okay, so active research. The core tools of active research I would use. The first one is Google Chrome. I think it's the best system for research from my experience. The only real downside is that it treats each tab as its own instance of the program. So it's kind of resource intensive and can slow down your computer. But their solution to that is a Chrome extension called the Great Suspender, which kind of like shuts down each tab if you're not using it. You can look that up on the Chrome store. The second tool you need is a form of an ad blocker. These are the three I recommend. These are all Chrome extensions that you can look up on the Chrome store. These just make research a lot easier because you're not just like bombarded with a bunch of ads popping up on websites, and Malwarebytes and uBlock Origin can protect your computer from any unwanted malware, something like that. OneTab is another really useful resource for research. So if I click the OneTab extension, it will kind of like take all the tabs I have open and save them in the OneTab tab, which kind of lets me, like, if I'm like in a big like research session and I have like 30 tabs open and I like immediately need to like go somewhere else, like I need to shut down my computer, but I don't want to lose all that research, I can click the OneTab button and then it'll immediately just compile it into like the OneTab system, and then I can reopen all those later. Because you don't want to have 30 tabs open at all times. The final one is Site Creator, which I think is pretty life-changing for research, especially like quick research, like doing like politics, uniqueness updates. So Site Creator, you can kind of enter your own personal preference for like what a site looks like. But it basically like scans an article's page and produces a site for you. And then you can copy that site into your Word document. There is a setting in Site Creator that's called Copy Selected Text with Site that you should select. That basically lets you, like, when you are copying the text to paste into your Word document, it also copies the site with it. So it makes research really efficient. That's like the first one I would get if you want to work on efficiency, which should be your like number one goal. So the next thing I want to talk about is Google search tricks. So when you're Googling, there are a few things you can do that can make research really efficient at finding the article you want. So the first one are quotes. So if I put a quote around a phrase into Google, it will search that exact phrase. So for example, like if I'm doing politics dissent research, if I put quotes around the phrase political capital, then it will just search for articles that use those two words together. Yeah, and then hyphen before a word or a phrase will limit out irrelevant articles. So on the NATO topic, if you were kind of looking for like a link to a dissad, then you might want to put like hyphen Ukraine, because you don't want articles to talk about Ukraine, because that's like what everything talked about that year. There's been a number of other instances where like I found something that I really didn't want to find, like as like a lot of the articles. And so I put a hyphen before that phrase because I don't want to see those results because I know they're not relevant to what I'm researching. And then I'm able to like go through the stuff that does not involve that phrase and find the article I want. The around function I think is really helpful. So what around does is like you type in a word like for X, right? And then you do another word for Y. The in is how many words in between how many words in between those two words you want. So like if I did like intellectual property around parentheses 5 parentheses end definition, then it will find me articles that use the words intellectual property and definitions within 5 words of each other. So I use this one a lot for T research, for topicality research, just because like it's really helpful to find those like words like defined, meaning, those kind of things around the word you're looking for. The next one is file type. I don't use this one as often, but if you're looking just for PDFs or another type of file, you can look up file type :PDF and it will only produce results that are PDFs. The next one is time frame. This one is really useful, I think. On Google, if you like look up like political capital or something, and then there's a button below, there's a button that says like tools. If you click that, click any time, then you can choose like from what time frame you want the article results to be. So like if you're doing updates at a tournament, you might want to do past 24 hours, and find like articles saying like the bill won't pass that are from the past 24 hours. Okay, so research. So we kind of like know the tools now of like, well, how do I like do research? But where should you start when you want to find a certain article? The first thing you need to do is explore the literature. So this is kind of like background info, read Wikipedia entries, just do like basic Google searches. Like first of all, like you could do like what are patents, like do those kind of searches. The second thing that you should do is as you're exploring the lit, you should note terms of art. So what I mean by terms of art are like very precise language. So for example, if you're researching like how big pharma uses patents, one term of art is like patent thickets, which refers to when big pharma like buys a ton of patents for one drug to deter like low cost competitors. So you should write down those terms of art because they can be very useful when you're doing Google searches. Um, the next thing you should focus on is finding the right side of the literature. It's very hard to kind of write a file or do research if you're just totally on the wrong side. You don't want to invest. You shouldn't invest time if you like know that this is like a losing battle if they produce like evidence as good or around as good as you have. Um, it's pretty hard to do research if you have like the very, very minority opinion. But that shouldn't mean like if you find more articles that are saying you're wrong than you're right, that you should just stop researching altogether. It's just like if you cannot find any that agree with you and a ton that disagree with you, then you should probably stop researching that and like kind of like, take a different route with your argument. The final thing is just adapt and revise. You shouldn't try and like force warrants when you're researching if they don't exist in literature. You should kind of let the literature guide you. So if like a certain term of art isn't working anymore, find a new one. Change like what you have in quotes, change the phrases. Like that's a great way to start. So the next thing is kind of like where do you find cards? So the first place, as I said before, is Google. I think it should be the first search for every assignment. The next thing is Google Scholar, which is kind of like scholarly work. Um, there's a button under each article you can see that says like cited by and then like a number. That's really useful because it tells you all the articles that have cited that article you've just read. So if you just find an article that's like amazing, it's perfect for your research assignment, and you've like found that one article that's great, go on Google Scholar and try the cited by function to find articles that cite that article, and then you can find more that kind of agree with it, or maybe even some that disagree with it and like directly citing the article you just found. Lexis and Hein Online are good for law reviews. They're good for finding like topicality interpretations. They're like very like legal based databases. Next is Congressional Research Service. The way it works is Congress asks this organization or this agency a question, and then the CRS will like produce like a report on it. It's really good for background reading. If you're kind of like interested in a topic or researching a topic, you should start like seeing if the CRS has any background reading on it because they are pretty helpful research, especially like in a debate sense. But Google is your go-to to start. Just kind of like use those search tricks I talked about earlier, and you will be able to find like a ton of really good cards. So the next thing is kind of like how do you know what to cut and what not to cut? Because if you're just cutting everything, it will take forever and you will hate research. So the first thing you should focus on is qualifications. They aren't always needed, but generally, like you want to find articles written by people who are experts in the field, and not like a random blogger. So if you find like a great article and it's from like someone's blog and it's like they don't even have a name, it's like their username or something, then that's generally something like you might not want to cut. Um, and you should probably just skip over it. The second thing is if it's conclusive. A lot of articles are just saying like stating the facts, right? So like in articles like drug prices have been like soaring recently, and then like it doesn't connect it to anything about like pharma or something, and it's not conclusive on what we should do, or maybe it's saying like these are like the five bills in Congress on like combating drug prices. That's not conclusive. So you want to find an article that's like this is the best bill to do it. All the other ones are like ineffective, right? So you want to find like conclusive evidence. The third thing you want to focus on is comparative. This is really helpful in a debate, it kind of performs the role of the judge because it compares like policy A versus policy B. So like to use the pharma example again, if it's like patent reform is more effective than drug pricing control, then you can then that's like a really good article because it's comparing the two and it's telling the judge, here's an expert in the field who says that our affirmative or our counter plan is better than their um, counter plan or affirmative. The final thing is novelty. Novelty is really important when you're producing like really big files with lots of cards. Because if all of your cards make the same warrant, there's no point in reading all of them, right? So like if you can find a card that has a new angle, a new reason why a certain thing is true, then that is a really good card to cut. Okay. The next thing is what if I can't access an article because of a paywall? Because yeah, just a paywall or something like that. I could talk about this for like 2 hours, but I don't have that time. So I'm gonna link you to this blog post on a new debate website posted by Anthony Trufanoff, who's a coach at Dartmouth and an NDT champ. But I'll also post a guide on accessing articles on the Policy Debate Central website, which I'll link in a second. But you should go to this link if you ever have that issue because it's a very comprehensive guide on how to get around that. But I do not have time to talk about that today. Okay, so the next phase of chopping cards is kind of like formatting the card itself. So the best tool for formatting, I think, is a mouse. I found them very useful, at least like in like the early years of when I started researching. When you're kind of like buying a mouse, the things I would look for, the first two are more important than the third one, but you should look for programmable buttons. So like this is my mouse. I have 12 buttons on it. Each of them are programmed to a certain like verbatim function. It makes researching a lot easier, faster. You can like select text much faster because you have like the mouse. The second thing is battery life. If you do have a Bluetooth mouse, you don't want it to a Bluetooth mouse, you don't want it to die really quickly. The third thing is Bluetooth. I personally favor a Bluetooth mouse, but it's up to you. Okay, so a few suggestions I have for mouses. Um, the first one is the Razer Naga. If you just look up RAZERNAGA, you'll find it. This one is pretty good. I know a lot of people have this one. It has a bunch of programmable buttons, which are helpful for debate research. The next one is the Logitech MX Anywhere. It has two programmable buttons. Yeah, and then the third one is the one I have, which is the Red Dragon Impact M908. So if you kind of want to get like really fast at research, these are the three mouses I recommend. Okay. You can also use your keyboard when researching. So I'm also going to post a guide on this on our website soon. But there's a way that you can use your arrow keys and like control and shift that you can kind of research really quickly and format cards with your keyboard buttons instead of like a mouse, which I think is actually faster than a mouse, but it requires a lot more like experience with it and you have to like set it up. It's very complex. But I'll post a guide on our YouTube channel and our website soon. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is kind of like how to process cards. So there's 4 steps to processing cards. The first one is you want to produce the site and copy the text in. So this kind of like is what Site Creator usually does. So if you've kind of pasted it in, then you want to tweak the site because Site Creator often makes mistakes. You want to put the qualifications in. You want to like make sure everything is in the citation that's needed. If you're using a scholarly article, Site Creator usually doesn't work, so you want to like write that in. Then you want to copy the text and like just prepare it for kind of the formatting portion. So the next part is the emphasizing and the underlining portion. Also, you don't have to do it in this order. This is just the way I think is the most efficient. Because you kind of like get to learn the warrants of the card before you write the tag. And then you can highlight after. So you don't like over highlight, you don't over underline. So the next thing is emphasizing and underlining the card. So like if you've kind of seen if you've seen a card before, you've noticed that like certain parts are underlined, certain parts are emphasized. So this is kind of like the core phase because you need to like read the whole thing and make sure you get all the warrants you want. Don't overemphasize because then each emphasis loses its importance. But you want to definitely emphasize parts of it. The third part is tagging it. So now that you've read the article fully and you've like emphasized the important warrants, now you know like what are the most important things to highlight of this card. So that's when I would write the tag. The fourth phase is highlighting. I like doing this after writing the tag because then like you don't over highlight. You know what warrants you need to get across based on like you're emphasizing and underlining. Um, so yeah, I would highlight last, but that's totally up to y'all. Okay, so then I want to go to like how do you create a site? Um, kind of like how I have formatted my sites in high school. A lot of people do it differently, but just like basic structure, basic needs in a citation. So the first thing you need is obviously like the author in the year. That's generally how that's presented right at the front. Well, some people do like the apostrophe here. Some people do just the last name that. Some people also include the second author up there. Just depends on your preference. The next thing you need is the qualifications for each author. So I'm of the opinion that it should not be like a sentence. It should not say like Sean is a fellow with the Europe, Russia, and Eurasia program. It should be like in a positive, right? So like Sean, comma, fellow with the Europe, Russia, and Eurasia program. So that's kind of like how I would recommend doing it. But you need qualifications for both. You don't need to do like their whole life story, like every single entry, every single like experience on their LinkedIn or something like that. Then the citation just gets way too long. But you want to highlight like their most important ones. Like if they have a PhD in like climate science and this is like a climate impact card, like that might be an important thing to include. For these two, this is an article about like this NATO app that had to do with framework nations concepts. And so this this Sean, he works at like a think tank for policy like between NATO and Russia. So that's kind of like what we highlighted in the qualifications. And then you want to do the date included somewhere in the citation, doesn't matter where. And then the title, obviously, and then a working link to find the article, which I think is pretty important. And then the final thing, if you do want to include your initials, you definitely can. I would just say don't make them like uh ugly to look at, which I feel like I've seen some of them are like, I don't know, like they kind of like reduce the aesthetic appeal of the citation. But also like you don't have to include them. I don't include them anymore in mine. But yeah, so that's kind of like how we produce that. This is for like a regular news article. If you're doing something that's like a journal article, you have to include a few other things. So the other things you need to include are kind of like the publication, right? So here you have like it's published in Industrial Biotechnology. It's volume 11, number 2, and this specific article between the pages of 84 and 90. That doesn't mean like the part you've pasted into your card is between those pages, but just like where this specific article uh is in this journal. Yeah. So that's like what you need to include if it's scholarly work. But yeah. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is creating and writing tags. So there are a few points I want to make about like how to create good tags. The first one is that tagging is really an art of balance. You want to kind of balance brevity and depth. So you don't want the tag to be so long that it takes really long to read and around and it's inefficient to even have that card in the first place. But you also don't want it to be too short that it doesn't make any warrants. So like if I have a tag that says no impact to grids, like sure, it gets the point across, but there's not really any warrant there. Um, a better tag would say something like no impacts to grids. Uh, the grid's decentralized and like single failures won't collapse the whole thing. That's kind of long because I haven't really thought about like how to make that short. But really investing time into producing a good tag is an important thing to do. Um, and I have two recommendations for kind of like writing a tag. The first one is you should assume the reader knows less than you. So you should assume like the judge who's reading the tag has not read the article, which they probably haven't, or hasn't read anything like in the area of the article. And the second thing is that tags build onto one another. So you shouldn't like especially like in the 1AC, there should not be redundant information in the tags. If you eliminate everything but the tags in the 1AC, it should read like a story, I guess, but where there's not redundant information like a sentence repeats itself. Okay, then there's two types of tags I would say. It just kind of depends on the situation when you should write each of them. There's a simple tag, which is basically just a claim and a warrant. And then there's complex tags, which are kind of like claim, warrant, and then implication for the debate. So if it's like, uh, I don't know, like the Food and Drug Administration is legally prohibited from negotiating drug prices, that means the counterpoint fails. So like there's your claim, your warrant, and then implication for debates, like that means the counterpoint fails. The next thing I would say is prioritize comparison. So in the last tag example I just gave, I said like that means the counterpoint fails as opposed to the F. That's kind of like comparison part of the tag. That's the most important part of a tag because then again, like that performs the role of the judge. And what you want your research to do is to make the life of the judge a lot easier because they can just read it and be like, oh yeah, like that's how I feel. So that's kind of like how you can sway the debate with your tags. Okay, the last phase, which I'll spend the least time on, just because I think there's only a few things I need to go over, but it is producing files. So my suggested method for how you should kind of produce a file and like compile all the evidence you've researched together. So the first thing I think you should do is what I've termed like a symbol. So this kind of means like pulling together all your cards if they're in like different Word documents, but they're all related to one assignment. Put them in one document, have an organizational system, have a part that's like for uniqueness, have a part that's for like cards you want in the 1AC, like for case cards, for answers to counterpoints, for answers to disads. So have an organizational system. Everyone does it differently. There's not one correct way to do it. You just kind of like need to find that way and stick to it because it makes producing files a lot easier. The second thing is use placeholder tags. So oftentimes like you don't exactly know where this card is going to go in your file. So it might be useful to not write the tag immediately and just say like uniqueness card and like dash and like a short like a warrant summary. That will make kind of like that will prevent you from having redundant information in your tags. The final thing for assembling is you need to highlight deliberately. So if you have like 30 cards all making the same warrant, um, and like the exact same statistic or something like that, or like even quoting the same person, like I frequently found like multiple articles about the same topic that quote the exact same person. You don't need to highlight each time that in that article, each quote, each of those quotes in the articles, because that just becomes redundant, right? Okay, the next phase is finalized. So this is kind of the phase you want to decide what card is the best, what card you want to put in your 1NC, what card you want to put in your 1AC. Yeah, and then you also want to finalize your tags, so get rid of the placeholder tags. You now know where each card kind of like fits into your file. And so you can kind of like finalize those tags. And then you want to standardize your blocks. So you want to go through and make sure everything is formatted correctly, make sure all of like the headers are correct and everything's in the right section. Because if it's not, then reading this file and like in the middle of the round, you're not gonna be able to find the card that you cut that you really want to read. So you want to stay organized. The final thing is kind of fix and fill. This is a step I think a lot of people skip, or at least files I've seen, like sometimes this is skipped. But you want to fill every hole in the file. If you want to produce like the best file ever, you need to like really focus on getting like every hole filled. You need to preempt answers to the file. So like one thing I like to do is whenever I'm producing an affirmative because I'm a 2A, I'll send it to like a 2N on our team, and then they'll say like what they would say in the 1NC, and that's kind of like how you preempt answers. I know like we have like we like the 2Ns do that to the 2As on our team too. So that's kind of like how we are able to preempt answers. You also want to preempt answers to answers, which kind of like is like, you know, third and fourth level testing. But the other thing I will say is that you should not avoid writing blocks you don't want to write. Oftentimes there's certain arguments you are like, you know, you've invested a lot of time in this file, you think it's pretty good, but there's that one argument that you just like can't find an answer to. That is not a reason to just like not write a block for it and just hope someone doesn't research or doesn't like realize that in the round. Because you should assume your opponent is like knows every answer to the file, right? So you should assume that so that you don't have to like come up with an answer in the middle of the round. So you should like have a block for that and don't just avoid writing that block. Yeah, okay. And then that's kind of it for my presentation. I will plug two websites. So the first one is Policy Debate Central website I co-manage. We have two podcast episodes up. The first one is about using debate in college admissions. The second one is about like this topic, an interview with an IP lawyer. We post news articles. We have camp files up there. We have YouTube links to our YouTube channel, and more. And then the second website is Debate Decoded, which is run by Anthony Trufanoff. It has strategy guides for this year for like the topic. It has blog posts explaining the topic. It has topic files that you can kind of download and then use in the round. It has debate theory articles and a lot more. Yeah. Are there any questions?